What's going on, everyone? And welcome back to another episode of Twins Latest. As always, I'm Sam Calder, and I hope you're all doing well. We've got a fun episode on deck today to kick off the week. So, without any further ado, let's jump on into it. There are reports coming out that the Twins attempted to trade for Brewers ace Freddie Peralta right before he wound up being traded to the Mets. And so that got me thinking, who might be some other notable pitchers that the Twins could look to trade for before spring training kicks off here in about 3 weeks? And I've done some digging. I have found two starting pitchers that I think would be both good additions for the Twins, as well as guys who might logically make a little more sense for other teams to trade away. They're both lefties, and with the Twins not having any left-handed pitchers in their starting rotation, I figured I would start there. The first name that stands out to me is Rays starting pitcher Shane McClanahan. He's been great when he's been on the field, but he really has not been on the field very much as of late. He had his second Tommy John surgery in August of 2023, and that caused him to miss all of the 2024 season. Then last spring, when he came back from that Tommy John surgery, he developed nerve irritation in his left tricep, which of course is his pitching arm, and he wound up having surgery on that to take care of those nerve issues last summer. And so he missed the entire 2025 season as well. So we have not seen Shane McClanahan pitch in a regular season game since August 2nd of 2023. I think those injury concerns, paired with the fact that he will be an unrestricted free agent after 2026, would be a couple reasons for the Rays to maybe be a little more willing to part ways with him. But like I said, he has been great when healthy. He had an ERA of 3.43 or lower each season from 2021 to 2023. He was an all-star in 2022 and 2023 and finished sixth in American League Cy Young voting in 2022. But it's a fair question to ask of, at this point, do we really think he will ever get back to that level? And maybe he does. But I think, two major arm surgeries in the last 2 years, that's a lot of asking for him to get back to that level of production. So I think it would make a little bit of sense for the Rays to maybe pivot from him as he enters the last year of his deal. As far as what the Twins would need to give up, I think it would have to be probably one fairly good prospect or the value equivalent of one. But like I said, with the health concerns, I think you could probably get him for a slight discount. The name that I decided on that I think would be fair for both sides is Kyle DeBarge. DeBarge was the 33rd overall pick by the Twins in the 2024 MLB draft. He spent time at multiple defensive spots last year, but primarily second base. He also played some shortstop and center field last year at high single A. There's a lot to like with Kyle DeBarge, I will say. He's a good defender, has incredible speed, which I'll touch on here shortly, and he draws a lot of walks. He showed some power in college. He had 21 home runs and 43 total extra base hits across 62 games at Louisiana Lafayette in 2024. But he only had 8 home runs in 121 games last year and 1 in just 26 games in 2024 after being drafted that summer. So he may not be a power hitter at any professional level, but he can still drive the ball, and good Lord, can he run. He stole 66 bases last year in 121 games and was only thrown out 8 times. He'll be 22 at the start of the season and should be at AA to start the year, I would think, at the very least soon thereafter. But I think that's a pretty fair return for a guy with as many question marks as there are in Shane McClanahan. The other name that I could see is Giant starting pitcher Robbie Ray. Ray was the American League Cy Young winner in 2021 with the Toronto Blue Jays. And much like McClanahan, he has dealt with his fair share of injuries in his major league career. He made 8 total starts over 2023 and 2024 combined, then had a full season of work in 2025 in San Francisco. Across 32 starts, he threw 182 in the third innings with a 3.65 ERA. He has 5 seasons in his career with more than 200 strikeouts, including 248 in his Cy Young season. He does struggle with walks, and that's something the Twin starters are great at limiting for the most part. So I think he could be, a nice contrast to the rest of the rotation in terms of he's going to get more swing and miss, but he is going to have more walks. But like I said, we also don't have a lefty, so I think, that could be something that teams aren't used to. Ray is also on the last year of his contract before becoming a unrestricted free agent next offseason. So much like McClanahan, for that reason, I think it would be a little bit easier to acquire him. I think his trade value is relatively similar to McClanahan's, but with both having an injury history and McClanahan being 5 years younger, I think Ray's value is maybe a little lower, but that's also assuming that the Twins aren't worried about McClanahan going forward. Either way, I digress. Let's look at a name who I think would be fair to give up. Call me crazy, I think that name is David Festa, who we've talked about here earlier last week. You could argue that Festa carries more trade value than Kyle DeBarge, a guy who's never seen the majors, but I've said this in a previous episode. I think Festa's future is more likely in the bullpen than in the starting rotation. He was always good for the first few innings in his starts, and then he'd get hard when he'd face hitters for a second time. Festa has 117 and 2/3 career major league innings under his belt over 2024 and 2025. He has a 5.12 ERA and a strikeout to walk ratio of 3.1 to 1, which is a good number. And he gets a fair amount of swings and misses, but struggles with giving up hard contact. So I think at this point, Festa would be a fine return for a 34-year-old on the last year of his deal for a team that probably won't be a true contender come October in the Giants. But those are a couple of pitchers I could see the Twins pursuing in the next couple of weeks if, and only if, they are still set on adding an established starting pitcher. And that got me thinking a little bit. With those reports that the Twins wanted to add another piece, could it mean that Minnesota, contrary to what I've been believing, is actually trying to make a playoff push in 2026? And I think the answer to that is yes. There was a quote from Tom Pohlad, part of the Pohlad family who owns the Twins, who said, quote, "Yeah, we're going to continue. The clock doesn't stop until opening day, right? For better or worse, Derek Falvey and Jeremy Zoll have a history of adding pieces late. I'm sure you're going to continue to see that. We know we have to continue to improve the bullpen, and we're going to continue to be opportunistic about creative pieces that can improve this team across the field." End quote. I think it says something that ownership would come out and basically say, yeah, we're not done, and we're going to continue to try to make this team better, which to some extent you have to say, but we haven't really heard ownership say something like that in previous years. So I think that's a positive sign. And we already covered a couple other trade pieces that I think could make sense to trade for, but they mentioned the bullpen specifically in that quote. So I want to focus on that group. I mentioned David Festa as someone I thought would be better in the bullpen than in the starting rotation. I think he's someone who would make a nice addition to that bullpen in 2026, assuming it doesn't, take a massive step up as a starter. But I'm not really banking on that happening. I also think we could see someone like Zebby Matthews, who we'll talk about later in the episode, make the move to the bullpen if he keeps struggling with giving up hard contact. Mick Abel is another name who can make that move. There's just so many starting pitchers who can make an impact in some form or fashion this year that there's not going to be enough room for all of them to make it in the rotation. You're not going to roll out an 8-man starting rotation. That's just not how baseball works. But the depth there is, quite honestly, among the best in the league. And I think moving some of those guys to the bullpen, which is easily the weakest part of the Twins roster, would be an easy way to dramatically improve this team, in my opinion. And I think it says a lot that the front office acknowledges that and is actively trying to improve it. Because going back to the initial question of, could it mean that Minnesota is trying to make a playoff push this year? I've said I don't think they're in a position to do that in 2026, but a lot of that has to do with health concerns and a lack of proven options in the bullpen. There's certainly a world where the Twins stay healthy, they make some moves to improve the pitching staff, and suddenly they're right there in the mix for the AL Central this year. So I think the Twins very well could end up making a playoff push, assuming they make the necessary moves to improve. And that is a big assumption. But I do like the direction and the conversations that are being had about this team moving forward this year. Sticking in the bullpen, I want to highlight a current free agent that I think would make a great addition to this Twins team, and that is left-handed relief pitcher Kolby Allard. Allard was kind of a spot starter / long reliever up until last year, where he only made 2 starts in comparison to 31 relief appearances. His numbers last year dramatically improved as a result of that change. He had a 2.63 ERA across 65 innings pitched with 42 strikeouts to 14 walks. He's never been a big strikeout pitcher. That's never really part of his game. But last year was unusually low. In the first half of the year, he had only 16 strikeouts in 36 innings pitched. But after the All-Star break, he had 26 strikeouts to just 4 walks over 28 innings and was fantastic. Allard has always been great when it comes to limiting walks. And last year, he was in the 83rd percentile among all pitchers at limiting hard contact as well. He's not going to get a lot of swing and miss. Like I said, it's just not part of his game. He's not going to strike many guys out. It's just not the kind of pitcher he is, and that's fine. If he can get soft contact consistently, like he did last year, I think he would make an outstanding addition to this Twins bullpen. He's also a lefty, as I said, which I've mentioned numerous times. The Twins have very few left-handed pitching options. So I'd assume the Twins wouldn't sign him to be the closer. He has one singular save in his 8 seasons in the majors. And in my opinion, that's a good thing because he wouldn't be getting paid like a closing pitcher. I'd anticipate roughly $5 million per year should the Twins sign him in terms of a contract. And they did just sign Taylor Rogers, who's also a lefty, so maybe they're not as pressed for another left-handed reliever right now. But I think Colby Allard would be a terrific addition to the Twins bullpen for 2026. And then to wrap up the episode, we have our 4th Twins player preview of the offseason. And today we are doing a deep dive into starting pitcher Zebby Matthews, whose name I brought up just a few minutes ago. Matthews is one of those guys who has the upside to turn into an ace, but also has the possibility where he just turns into nothing. He had a 5.56 ERA last year, over 79 and a third innings. It's improvement from his 6.69 ERA in 2024, and the advanced metrics give a lot of reason for optimism entering this year. His expected ERA was only a 4.67, which isn't great, but I mean, it's almost a full run lower than what his actual ERA was last year. He gets a lot of swings and misses. He averages about 10K per 9, which is promising for a young pitcher. And he doesn't walk many guys either. Another promising sign for a young guy. He struggles largely from being a fly ball pitcher and giving up hard contact. He's giving up just under 2 home runs per 9 innings pitched in his 117 career innings. Although that number, for what it's worth, was down at 1.4 home runs per 9 innings in 2025. So encouraging to see some improvements there. He spent a bit of time at AAA in 2025 and looked outstanding. Over 36 and 2/3 innings, he had a 1.72 ERA with 47 strikeouts to 9 walks and only gave up 1 home run in those 36 innings. Matthews has a 6-pitch mix, which is great. The problem with that, though, is that 5 of those 6 pitches got hit very hard last year. On balls put in play, his only pitch with a batting average allowed under 333 was his slider, where hitters only hit 150 on all balls put in play. Looking on the bright side, though, according to his Stuff Plus metric, his fastball, slider, sinker, and curveball were all above league average in terms of movement. He's obviously good at getting them in the zone and limiting walks. Now it just comes down to, can he limit the extra base hits? He gave up 94 total hits in the majors last year, and he struggled with giving up hits as well in 2024. If he's going to become the guy a lot of people think he can, he's going to have to limit those more, which, for what it's worth, is much easier said than done. It just flat out has to happen, though. So fingers crossed we see some strides in that department. And I will say, usually for young pitchers, it's easier to fix hard contact than it is to fix command issues. And Zebby Matthews, as we've seen, does not have command issues. So there's a lot to like about the raw upside of Zebby Matthews. He's still only 25, so in theory, his best is yet to come, and we could see that in 2026. And if we do, I mean, this Twins rotation could very well end up being one of the better ones in the American League. I mentioned last week that former Twins relief pitcher Danny Coulomb has said that Zebby Matthews has the potential to be an ace. He just needs to string together multiple good starts in a row now, and I think kind of just build some confidence. Last year, he would give up 1 run over 7 innings in one start, and then the next start give up 5 runs over 4. There was just very little consistency. It was kind of all or nothing. And so I think if we get a little more in the consistency department, if he can get his ERA in the low 4s, or ideally even better in the 3s, that would be a very, very good sign of him turning into the guy a lot of people think that he has the potential to be. But I think that's all I've got for today's episode. If you guys enjoyed this episode of Twins Latest, please do me a favor and subscribe. If there's anything Twins related you guys want me to talk about in a future episode, please let me know in the comments. But until next time, I'm Sam Calder, and I'm out.